What's going on, you guys? So a lot of noise has been being made of Devin Haney's physique going into his 147-pound debut against Brian Norman Jr. You know, I seen him recently on the mitts with a video that was just released, and I gotta say, man, he looked really sharp. He looked sharp on the mitts. Physique wise, there's pictures I had seen. He looks all diced up. He looks ready to go for November 22nd when he steps in the ring with Brian Norman Jr. But I've questioned this move really ever since the moment I had heard about him potentially going to 147. And the first time I had heard about it was when Terrence Crawford was fighting Israel Madrimov, right? On that card, at some point, they shifted the camera to him, and the commentators were saying, well, this might be, Devin Haney's next move, going to 147 pounds, yada, 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 And I remember sitting there watching the fight with my pops, and I was just thinking, and I think we even talked about it too, that I don't know if 147 pounds is going to be the right move for Devin Haney, considering he never was really a puncher at 135, nor really at 140. So I don't think 147 is going to suit him too well. And I still feel the same way. And I've seen some people give their predictions on this fight. Devin Haney fans especially are saying that the footwork of a Devin Haney and the jab are going to win him the fight. Now, I usually would agree with a boxer winning the fight just strictly off boxing ability, right, over a brawler. But in this case, Brian Norman Jr. isn't just a brawler. He's not just a pressure come forward fighter. I know a majority of his fights, actually, he's been the counter puncher, the guy that may be on the back foot. A lot of the guys that he's fought have this like Mexican style come forward pressure type of style. The only time we really haven't seen that was against like a Quentin Randall, and that was a guy that some people say that Brian Norman struggled with, right? Now with Devin Haney, right, with him having a good jab, he does have a good jab. There's often times I've seen it, especially in the Ryan Garcia fight, where he's getting countered over his jab, and he leaves openings for the counter, particularly the left hook, right? Now I understand Ryan Garcia was on PEDs, but even a juiced out Ryan Garcia, I don't think is on the same level of a Brian Norman Jr. Ryan Garcia, I guess now is in talks to fight Mario Barrios, who, in my opinion, is probably the weakest champion of all time. But all that being said, he may become a champion. Right now, he's not. And I didn't see an opportunity for him to become a champion. But now I can see him potentially beating a Mario Barrios. But all that to say, Brian Norman Jr. is levels above a Ryan Garcia. And we saw the success. Even though he was on PEDs, there were still counter shot opportunities with the left hook that were open for Ryan Garcia. Those are defensive lapses on Devin Haney's part. Now, there have been guys that throughout the course of the sport haven't had power and have moved up divisions and had a lot of success. Pernell Whitaker being one of them, Shakur Stevenson in the modern day, Floyd Mayweather. But the thing that separates those guys from a Devin Haney is strictly just the defense. And there's not too many openings where you can counter those guys. Those guys' defenses are just on point all the time. Now, when I film study some of Devin Haney's fights, even when he's convincingly winning, right, there tends to be times where he's lunging in with his shots. Whether it be the jab where he leaves his right hand just a little too far down, or just not in the right placement, and he's able to get hit with a counter shot, the left hook. Or where he's just, his footwork, now that we're going to footwork, really isn't the best. I mean, a lot of people claim that his footwork is elite, and I'm not saying it's trash, but we saw guys like Vasily Lomachenko close the distance on him. Jorge Linares was able to close the distance on him. And then the other guys he's fought, a lot of them you have to look at the time in their career when he fought them, right? A Gamboa, even a Linares, a Lomachenko, Regis Prograis, Jojo Diaz. I think Jojo Diaz was more so in his prime when he had fought him, but Jojo Diaz isn't a world beater, and he was quite a bit smaller than Devin Haney. But Vasily Lomachenko, a lot of people may say, well, Vasily Lomachenko had great footwork, that's why, blah, blah, blah. Just because his daddy put him in ballerina classes throughout his life doesn't mean he had great footwork. How come his footwork didn't show up when he fought Teofimo Lopez? And every time he tried to do a defensive maneuver or, take an angle to land a shot, Teofimo Lopez was able to move with him, was able to pivot with him, turn with him. So I think Vasily Lomachenko's footwork is a little bit overrated, but not saying it's the worst or not saying it's the best either. All I'm saying is this: when it comes to those two things, another thing that they have in common, right, or another thing to point out, I'd rather say, is yes, the age was a factor, and then he's always had a size and reach advantage over every single guy except Ryan Garcia. Vasily Lomachenko was outsized. Regis Prograis, even though he had moved up to 140 pounds, Devin Haney is a guy that probably walks around 170. And he talked about it in his latest interview with Ariel Helwani, talking about how just the weight cuts were horrible for him, right? Because he's really a big guy cutting down to those weight classes. But every fight, dang near, he's had a size and reach advantage and was just naturally the bigger guy. And coming into this fight with Brian Norman Jr., we're not going to see that. On paper, these guys are the same exact size, same height, same reach, same everything. The only thing that's different is this is probably the most complete athlete Devin Haney is going to be sharing the ring with. I don't think Vasily Lomachenko is as great of an athlete as a Brian Norman Jr. Regis Prograis, no. I mean, I'm trying to think of any notable name on Devin Haney's resume. We clearly know that Gamboa wasn't. Jojo Diaz wasn't, So, I mean, I look at it, and I don't think he was a better athlete. I don't think Ryan Garcia is a better athlete than Brian Norman Jr. Brian Norman Jr. is very explosive, and though he hasn't shown it in the ring, because a lot of the guys, like I mentioned, are come-forward pressure style fighters that he's had to fight, I think he's going to have the feet to keep up with the Devin Haney. And going to the jab of Devin Haney, I know I brought this up, and how he has opportunities for Brian Norman Jr. to counter. And people may say, oh, that's a casual take to say, well, he's got a good left hook. Ryan Garcia had a good left hook. Yes, they both have good hooks, but what I've noticed from Brian Norman Jr. is he's able to throw that punch from different trajectories, different, spots. He can throw a check left hook. He can throw a lunging left hook, a lead left hook. He can, counter it with the left hook. And as you saw in the last fight with Jin Sasaki, he throws the punch from different trajectories. He threw that last shot, that ended the fight, from like almost his hip, as if it was like an uppercut left hook. So there's different ways that Brian Norman Jr. is able to throw the hook that I think is going to give Devin Haney problems. And not to mention the counter-punching ability of Brian Norman Jr. He's not just dependent on a left hook like Ryan Garcia was. I watched the Santillan fight, and he was throwing uppercuts, hooks, right hands, and he was using all those shots as counter shots. So when it gets close on the pocket, I expect Devin Haney to either like tie up or try to maneuver out. I think Brian Norman Jr. is going to be able to have the feet to keep up with him. Alongside, he's the stronger of the two, so I think he's going to win in the clinch. I just don't really see Devin Haney winning this fight, in my honest opinion. If I'm going to have to pick, I'm picking Brian Norman Jr., and I'm probably picking stoppage. I just think that this was too big of a risk for Devin Haney to take, and based off his last performance, I wasn't impressed at all. He had fought a Jose Ramirez, who was completely slow, both feet and hand speed wise, that just couldn't keep up with him. Now, if Devin Haney fights that same exact style fight, I for sure think that Brian Norman Jr. is going to win the fight. I think, like I mentioned, he's going to have the foot speed to catch up with the Devin Haney. He's sure going to let his hands go a lot more than a Jose Ramirez. And let's be completely honest, I mean, the Jose Ramirez that he fought, a lot of people were saying he's cooked. I mean, even though his resume doesn't necessarily say that, he lost to a Josh Taylor, Arnold Barboza, and maybe somebody else, if I'm not mistaken. And he's not terribly old, but he lost to Arnold Barboza, bro. And we seen him in Teofimo's last fight. Didn't really impress. I had high hopes for Arnold Barboza going into that fight, but he clearly let me down. All in all, man, I just didn't like what I saw from Devin Haney his last fight. I do think the Ryan Garcia fight definitely took a toll on him, whether it be physically, but for sure mentally. It just didn't look like the same guy in there. Now, will he resurrect himself and come back to, the best Devin Haney we could possibly imagine? Maybe, I don't know. But even then, I still think that he's going to lose. A lot of people make it out to be as if Brian Norman Jr. is strictly just a brawler. And I don't think so. I don't think that's the case at all. You got to think about it. This is a guy who had a great amateur pedigree. He won all kinds of national titles in the amateurs. And he's fought, whether we know him or not, pretty stiff competition. Brian Norman Jr., I was listening to, Brian Norman Sr. talk about it. Because Devin Haney had made some comments about, Top Rank, they groomed him well, and, Top Rank's got the best matchmakers and this, that, and the other. And Brian Norman Jr., his name wasn't like on the same level, or he wasn't getting promoted as if he was like a Shakur Stevenson, an Abdullah Mason, none of those guys. He was more so, B-side at best on a lot of his fights, and I think he was the underdog against Santillan, and we all know how that fight ended. But this isn't a guy that really has had an easy route. He's became champion, so we have to give him credit when it's due. And going back to what Devin Haney said about the Top Rank, and he said this on Ariel Helwani's show, saying that Top Rank has the best matchmakers and he hasn't fought nobody, he doesn't know anybody on his resume, blah, blah, blah. It sounds very similar to what Earl Spence was saying when he had fought Crawford. Like almost the same exact things. And we saw how that fight ended. Now, I don't necessarily see Brian Norman Jr. winning in the fashion that, or winning as dominantly as Terrence Crawford did. I do think it could be the same result where he stops him. But I do expect Devin Haney to put up some resistance, maybe have a couple of the early rounds, maybe up until the point where Brian Norman Jr. stops him. It could be a very competitive fight. But I do got Brian Norman Jr. winning this fight. Maybe Devin Haney gives him a little bit of trouble early on, but I think sooner or later, Brian Norman Jr. is going to be able to get to him and, close the show. But those are my thoughts on the fight, man. Let me know what you guys think. Who do you have winning this fight? Do you got Debo Dev is what they're calling him, pulling off, I guess in a lot of people's eyes would be an upset, or do you got Brian Norman Jr., coming out victorious, remaining champion? Let me know. Hate, like, comment, subscribe.